The Galactic Deathworld Council chambers were, in a word, ridiculous. Picture the most pretentious government building you've ever seen, then multiply it by 10 and coat it in enough chrome and holographic nonsense to blind a small moon. The council members sat in their floating chairs, arranged in a perfect circle because apparently even seating arrangements had to be dramatically symbolic in space politics. Chairman Vexstar, a 7-foot-tall reptilian with scales that shifted color based on his mood, currently displaying an obnoxious shade of pompous purple, cleared his throat with the kind of theatrical flair that suggested he practiced this moment in mirrors. His voice boomed through the chamber's acoustic enhancers, because heaven forbid anyone miss a single syllable of his self-importance. Esteemed colleagues, he began, because nobody in galactic government could start a sentence without at least 3 unnecessary adjectives. We gather today to address the ongoing challenge of our newest Deathworld acquisition. Planet designation, Infernus the 7 continues to eliminate every species we send there with embarrassing efficiency. Security Chief Rook, an insectoid creature whose paranoia was so legendary that he checked his own shadow for threats, clicked his mandibles nervously. The statistics are concerning, Chairman. Average survival time remains at 2.7 months. The Zephyrian expedition lasted exactly 93 days before their distress beacon went silent. The Crystalline Collective managed 87 days, and frankly, I'm still not sure how they died since they don't technically have organs. Ambassador Quillex, whose amphibian features were permanently set in what could charitably be called a diplomatic smile, raised a webbed hand. Perhaps we should consider that our assessment methods require refinement. After all, we've been testing species on Deathworlds for over 3 centuries, and our success rate remains at a robust 0%. 0% success rate is not robust, Rook muttered, his compound eyes darting around the chamber, as if expecting hostile fauna to materialize from the walls. 0% success rate is what we call a complete failure in most civilized sectors of the galaxy. Vexstar's scales shifted to an irritated shade of orange. The failure rate is irrelevant. The purpose of the Deathworld Council is to identify species capable of surviving in the galaxy's most hostile environments. The fact that no species has yet proven worthy only demonstrates the effectiveness of our selection criteria. Or, Quillex suggested with the kind of gentle diplomacy that made you want to throw something, it demonstrates that we're essentially running a very expensive funeral service for volunteers. The chamber fell silent, except for the ambient hum of technology trying very hard to look impressive. Each council member had their own theory about why their Deathworld trials kept ending in what the official reports diplomatically termed complete biological cessation of all participants. Some blamed inadequate preparation, others pointed to equipment failure, a few suggested that maybe, just maybe, they were sending people to planets that were actually uninhabitable. But that was impossible. The Galactic Deathworld Council had been the galaxy's premier authority on hostile environment survival for over 300 years. They had protocols, procedures, and enough bureaucratic red tape to strangle a space whale. They were experts. They were professionals. They were absolutely, completely, and utterly convinced that they knew exactly what they were doing. They were also about to meet a species that would make them question everything they thought they knew about the concept of a Deathworld. Very well, Vexstar announced, his scales settling into a confident gold. Let us review the applications for our next trial. I trust we have the usual selection of optimistic civilizations ready to demonstrate their inevitable inadequacy. That was when the proximity alarms started screaming. The alarms weren't just ringing, they were having what could only be described as a complete electronic nervous breakdown. Red lights flashed with the kind of urgency usually reserved for imminent galactic collapse, and the chamber's automated voice kept repeating UN scheduled vessel approaching in 17 different languages, because apparently panic was more effective when multilingual. Security Chief Rook immediately went into full paranoid mode, which for him meant checking his sidearm, scanning the room for hidden threats, and questioning whether his own reflection might be plotting against him. Unknown vessel, designation pending, requesting emergency docking clearance, he reported, his voice cracking with the kind of stress that suggested he'd been waiting his entire career for this exact moment to justify his anxiety. The main view screen flickered to life, displaying what could generously be called a spaceship, though it looked more like someone had taken a perfectly good vessel and used it as a battering ram against several asteroids and possibly a small moon. The hull was scarred, dented, and covered in what appeared to be decorative red streaks that definitely weren't paint. That ship has seen better days, Ambassador Quillex observed with his trademark diplomatic understatement. Also better decades, possibly better centuries. But the truly confusing part wasn't the ship's condition. It was the casual tone of the voice that crackled through the communications system. Hello there. This is Captain Jake Murphy of the Earth vessel Perseverance. We're here about the Deathworld thing. Hope we're not late." The three council members exchanged glances. Chairman Vextor's scales shifted through several colors before settling on confused beige. "Earth?" he said, accessing the Galactic database with the kind of frantic energy that suggested he was really hoping this was some kind of administrative error. "I'm not finding any record of a planet called Earth in our systems." "Oh, we're pretty new to the whole galactic community thing," came the cheerful reply. "Just figured out faster than light travel about 50 years ago. Been exploring the neighborhood, you know how it is." Rook's mandibles clicked frantically. New species, no prior contact, arriving unannounced in a damaged vessel requesting access to restricted Deathworld trials. This has all the hallmarks of either a trap or a very elaborate suicide mission. "Could be both," Quillex suggested helpfully. The docking bay doors opened with the kind of mechanical precision that the council was very proud of, and three figures emerged from the battered ship. They walked with the casual confidence of people who were either completely fearless or completely oblivious to danger. Given that they'd just traveled across the galaxy in what appeared to be a flying scrap heap, both options seemed equally likely. Captain Jake Murphy was disappointingly ordinary looking. Medium height, brown hair that suggested he'd given up on professional grooming somewhere around the second solar system, and clothing that was practical rather than impressive. He was followed by Engineer Rosie Park, a woman whose expression suggested she'd seen everything the universe had to offer and found most of it mildly annoying, and Navigator Tom Walsh, whose nervous energy was the kind that made you wonder if he'd consumed too much caffeine or just spent too much time in space. "Greetings," Chairman Vextor began, his scales shifting to what he hoped was an intimidating shade of burgundy. "I am Chairman Vextor of the Galactic Deathworld Council. Your arrival is highly irregular." "Sorry about that," Captain Murphy replied, looking around the chamber with the kind of casual interest you'd show when visiting a mildly impressive tourist attraction. "We heard through the grapevine that you folks test species on dangerous planets. Figured we'd volunteer." "Volunteer?" Rook's voice cracked. "Species don't volunteer for Deathworld trials. They're selected based on careful analysis of their survival capabilities, psychological profiles, and technological advancement." Engineer Park spoke up for the first time, her voice carrying the kind of deadpan delivery that suggested she'd had this conversation before. "We filled out the application forms. Took us about 20 minutes. Your bureaucracy is refreshingly straightforward compared to Earth's tax system." Navigator Walsh nodded enthusiastically. "Plus, we figured it might be fun. We don't get many chances to explore really dangerous places anymore." The three council members stared at the humans with the kind of bewildered silence that suggested they were either witnessing something unprecedented or experiencing a collective psychotic break. "Any more?" Quillex asked, his diplomatic training finally kicking in. "Oh well, you know how it is," Tom replied with a shrug. "Once you've mapped most of your home planet's death traps, you start looking for new challenges." The silence that followed Tom's casual comment was the kind of silence that suggested three highly intelligent alien minds were trying very hard to process information that didn't quite fit their understanding of how the universe worked. Chairman Vextor's scales cycled through several colors before settling on what could only be described as administrative confusion. "Death traps?" he asked, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone who suspected they were about to hear something they really didn't want to know. "You know, the usual stuff," Captain Murphy said, waving his hand dismissively. "Volcanoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, that sort of thing. Nothing too exciting once you get used to it." Security Chief Rook's compound eyes focused intently on the humans, his paranoia sensors working overtime. "Perhaps we should proceed directly to the briefing. Standard protocol for Deathworld trials requires full disclosure of hazards and survival expectations." "Excellent idea," Vextor said, his scales brightening to their most official shade of bureaucratic gold. "Prepare the presentation chamber. These humans should understand exactly what they're volunteering for." The presentation chamber was another exercise in galactic over-engineering. Holographic displays surrounded the room, creating an immersive environment that could simulate any planetary conditions. The lighting dimmed to what the designers clearly thought was an appropriately dramatic level, and ominous music began playing from hidden speakers. "Behold," Chairman Vextor announced, his voice echoing with practiced authority, "Planet Infernus 7. The ultimate test of survival capability." The holographic display sprang to life, showing a planet that looked like it had been designed by someone with serious anger management issues. The surface was a hellscape of jagged mountains, bubbling lava flows and storms that made hurricanes look like gentle breezes. The presentation continued with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested the council had spent considerable time and money on their intimidation techniques. The atmosphere is 93% sulfur dioxide, Vextar continued, his scales shifting to an appropriately menacing shade of red. The gravity is 3 times standard galactic normal. The average temperature ranges from scalding to literally molten. The native flora consists entirely of carnivorous plants that hunt in coordinated packs. Wait, Engineer Park interrupted, pulling out what appeared to be a standard tablet and stylus. Did you say the plants hunt in packs? That's actually pretty interesting. What's their coordination mechanism? Rook's mandibles clicked frantically. That's not the point. The point is that they will kill you. The plants will kill you. The atmosphere will kill you. The gravity will kill you. And the temperature will kill you. Everything on this planet is specifically designed to kill you. But how do the plants coordinate? Tom asked, his navigator's curiosity clearly piqued. Do they use chemical signals? Some kind of root network communication system? Ambassador Quillex cleared his throat with the kind of diplomatic cough that suggested he was trying to get the conversation back on track. The method of coordination is less important than the fact that no species has ever survived longer than 3 months on Infernus 7. The Crystalline Collective, one of our most resilient species, lasted exactly 87 days. What happened to them? Captain Murphy asked, and there was something in his tone that suggested he was genuinely curious rather than appropriately terrified. We're not entirely sure, Rook admitted. Their final transmission mentioned something about the local predators being surprisingly clever, and then the signal went dead. Predators? Rosie looked up from her note-taking. You didn't mention predators. What kind of predators? The holographic display shifted to show creatures that looked like someone had taken the worst nightmares of every species in the galaxy, and combined them into something that violated several laws of physics and possibly good taste. 6-legged beasts with rows of teeth that could bite through starship hull plating. Flying creatures with acid for blood and tempers that made rabid wolverines look cuddly. Underground tunneling things that moved in swarms and had a disturbing tendency to emerge from unexpected directions. The fauna of Infernus 7 represents the ultimate expression of hostile evolution, Vextar explained, his scales now displaying what he clearly thought was an appropriately intimidating pattern of black and red. Every creature on this planet has evolved for maximum lethality. They are faster, stronger, and more aggressive than anything you can imagine. Huh, Captain Murphy said, studying the display with the kind of casual interest you might show when looking at a restaurant menu. So basically Tuesday back home then. The 3 council members froze. Even the ominous background music seemed to pause. Tuesday? Quillex asked, his diplomatic training apparently not covering this particular scenario. Yeah, you know, typical Tuesday stuff, Tom said cheerfully. Though I have to say your flying things look way less scary than our hornets. Do they have stingers? Please tell me they have stingers. Regular teeth and acid blood are so much easier to deal with than something that can inject venom. Security Chief Rook made a sound that might have been either a laugh or a complete mental breakdown. Easier to deal with. Oh sure, Engineer Park said, still taking notes. Acid blood just means you need proper protective equipment. Venomous stingers mean you need antivenom, and that's assuming you can synthesize it fast enough. Much more complicated logistics. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that suggested the universe itself was trying to figure out what the hell was happening. Chairman Vextar's scales had cycled through his entire emotional spectrum and were now displaying colors that didn't exist in any known taxonomy. His voice, when he finally managed to speak, carried the careful tone of someone who was beginning to suspect that their fundamental understanding of reality might need some adjustments. Perhaps, he said slowly, we should learn more about your homeworld. For our records, of course. Captain Murphy shrugged. Sure, what do you want to know? Let's start with something basic. Ambassador Quillex suggested, his diplomatic instincts screaming that this was either going to be very enlightening or very disturbing. What's the climate like on Earth? Oh, pretty mild, Tom said cheerfully. I mean, we've got deserts where the sand gets hot enough to cook food, but that's only in some places. And the ice caps are nice and cold, assuming you don't mind temperatures that can freeze your blood solid in about 30 seconds. Security Chief Rook's mandibles were clicking at a frequency that suggested imminent panic. That doesn't sound mild. Well, compared to the really exciting places, it's pretty tame, Captain Murphy explained. The Antarctic is basically a frozen wasteland where the wind can strip flesh from bone, but it's not like it's actively trying to kill you. It's just that if you make a mistake, you die horribly. That's still trying to kill you, Rook protested. No, Engineer Park said, looking up from her notes with the patient expression of someone explaining something obvious to a child. Actively trying to kill you would be like our Australian continent. That place has spiders the size of dinner plates, snakes that can kill you with a single bite, jellyfish that can stop your heart, crocodiles that view humans as convenient snacks, and plants that cause pain so intense people have been known to kill themselves just to make it stop. The holographic display was still showing the horrors of Infernus 7, but somehow the alien predators were starting to look less impressive compared to what the humans were describing. Surely these are rare occurrences, Quilex said, his diplomatic training working overtime to find some reasonable explanation. Isolated to specific regions. Oh, Australia's just one continent, Tom said helpfully. We've got 6 others. Well, 7 if you count Antarctica, but that one's just trying to freeze you to death, so it's not very creative. What about the others? Vexstar asked, though his scales were now displaying a color that suggested he really didn't want to know. Africa's got lions, leopards, elephants that can stomp you flat, hippos that kill more people than any other large mammal, and enough venomous snakes to stock a nightmare factory, Captain Murphy said, counting on his fingers. Asia's got tigers, cobras, Komodo dragons, and about 1,000 other things that consider humans a dietary staple. North America has bears that can tear your face off, mountain lions, rattlesnakes, and wolves, Rosie added matter-of-factly. South America has jaguars, anacondas, piranhas, and poison dart frogs. Europe used to have more dangerous stuff, but humans killed most of it off because it was inconvenient. You killed off your predators because they were inconvenient. Rook's voice had reached a pitch that suggested his vocal cords were staging a rebellion. Well yeah, Tom said. Hard to build cities when there are giant cave bears wandering around eating people, though we kept some of the smaller dangerous stuff. Makes life interesting. The 3 council members were staring at the humans with the kind of expression usually reserved for natural disasters or tax audits. Chairman Vexstar's scales had settled into a color that could best be described as existential dread mixed with administrative confusion. And the weather? Quilex asked weakly. Oh, the weather's fantastic, Captain Murphy said, with genuine enthusiasm. We've got hurricanes that can level entire cities, tornadoes that can pick up houses and throw them around like toys, earthquakes that can split the ground open, volcanoes that can bury entire regions in ash, and tsunamis that can wash away coastal areas. Don't forget the lightning, Rosie added. About 100 lightning strikes hit the planet every second. Most of them don't kill anyone, but the ones that do are pretty spectacular. And flooding, Tom chimed in. Rivers that can rise 20 feet in an hour and sweep away everything in their path. Though that's usually only during monsoon season. Monsoon season. Vexstar's voice cracked. Oh, that's when the sky basically falls down, Captain Murphy explained. Months of rain so heavy it can drown you just by standing outside. But it's seasonal, so you can plan around it. Security Chief Rook had been scanning the humans with his various sensors throughout this conversation, and his readings were becoming increasingly disturbing. I'm detecting unusual scarring patterns on all 3 humans, consistent with exposure to extreme environmental hazards. Yeah, well, you know how it is, Tom said, with a shrug. I've been struck by lightning twice, caught in 3 avalanches, and once spent 4 days in a desert with no water. Rosie got bit by a shark during her vacation last year. It was a small shark, Rosie said dismissively. Barely drew blood. And Jake here survived a hurricane by hiding in a basement that flooded, then got trapped in a cave system for 2 weeks. Tom continued. The cave thing was actually pretty relaxing, Captain Murphy admitted. Nice and quiet, plenty of time to think. Though the bats were annoying. Ambassador Quilex was studying the humans with the kind of intense focus that suggested he was trying to determine if they were pulling an elaborate prank, or if the universe had somehow developed a sense of humor. Your planet sounds utterly lethal. Earth? Nah. Earth's great, Tom said, with genuine warmth. Sure, it tries to kill you occasionally, but that's what makes it interesting. Plus all the dangerous stuff made us really good at surviving. And the red streaks on your ship? Rook asked, though his voice suggested he was afraid of the answer. The 3 humans exchanged glances, and for the first time since they'd arrived, there was a moment of awkward silence. Oh, that, Captain Murphy said eventually. We had a bit of a diplomatic incident on our way here. Diplomatic incident. Vexstar's scales were now cycling through colors so rapidly they were starting to strobe. Well, we stopped at this space station for supplies, Rosie explained. Some pirates decided we looked like easy targets. They were wrong. Very wrong, Tom added cheerfully. Turns out bringing weapons designed to kill things that can shrug off lightning strikes makes you really effective against space pirates. We tried to negotiate first, Captain Murphy said defensively. But they started shooting, and well, old habits die hard. How many pirates? Quillex asked, though his diplomatic training was telling him this was a question he really didn't want answered. All of them, Rosie said simply. The council chamber fell silent, except for the gentle hum of technology and the sound of 3 alien minds attempting to process information that fundamentally challenged their understanding of the universe. On the holographic display, the deadly predators of Infernus 7 continued their intimidating display, but somehow they were starting to look less like ultimate killing machines, and more like particularly energetic housepets. So Captain Murphy said eventually, about this Deathworld trial. When do we start? The question hung in the air like a toxic gas leak in a confined space. Chairman Vextar's scales had given up trying to display coherent emotions and were now just flashing random colors like a broken traffic light. Security Chief Rook's mandibles were clicking at a frequency that suggested he was either trying to communicate with his home planet or having a complete nervous breakdown. Ambassador Quillex's diplomatic smile had frozen into an expression that looked like someone had just explained quantum physics using interpretive dance. Perhaps, Vextar said slowly, we should take a brief recess to review our protocols. Sure thing, Captain Murphy said agreeably. We'll just wait here. Don't suppose you have any coffee. Space travel makes you appreciate the simple things. The 3 council members retreated to what they optimistically called the strategic planning chamber, but which was really just a soundproof room where they could panic without damaging their professional reputations. The moment the doors sealed, all pretense of dignity evaporated. We have a problem, Rook announced, his voice carrying the kind of calm that suggested he was about 3 seconds away from complete hysteria. According to my analysis, these humans are not just from a death world. They are from what can only be classified as a Class X extinction event masquerading as a planet. That's impossible, Vextar protested, though his scales were now displaying a color that suggested he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. Class X designation is reserved for planets that actively prevent the evolution of intelligent life. Exactly, Rook said, his compound eyes darting around the room as if expecting human predators to materialize from the walls. Which means these humans didn't just survive their homeworld. They conquered it. They turned a planet-sized death trap into a nursery for raising apex predators. Ambassador Quillex was reviewing his diplomatic files with the kind of frantic energy that suggested he was looking for a loophole in the Galactic Constitution. The Deathworld Council Charter clearly states that we test species on hostile environments to determine their survival capabilities. It doesn't say anything about what to do when the species turns out to be more dangerous than the environment. We could rescind the invitation, Vextar suggested hopefully. On what grounds? Quillex asked. That they're too qualified. That they make our Deathworld trials look like a vacation resort. They wiped out an entire pirate fleet on their way here, Rook said, his paranoia reaching levels that required new measurement scales. They described it as a diplomatic incident. What do they call actual warfare? The 3 council members sat in silence, contemplating the implications of their situation. They had built their entire civilization's reputation on being the galaxy's premier experts in hostile environment survival. They had created trials that eliminated every species that attempted them. They had the most dangerous planet in their catalog, a world so lethal that it had never sustained life for more than 3 months. And now they were faced with a species that considered this ultimate challenge to be roughly equivalent to a Tuesday afternoon. We need more information, Quillex said, eventually. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. They returned to the main chamber, where the humans were examining the holographic display of Infernus VII with the kind of professional interest that archaeologists might show when discovering a new dig site. Interesting ecosystem, Engineer Park was saying, pointing at the carnivorous plant formations. The coordination between species suggests a level of environmental cooperation that's actually quite sophisticated. The predator-prey relationships are fascinating too, Navigator Walsh added. Look at how the flying creatures have adapted to work with the ground-based hunters. It's like the entire planet is one big collaborative hunting system. We have some additional questions about your homeworld, Vextar announced, his scales settling into what he hoped was an appropriately official color. Fire away, Captain Murphy said cheerfully. You mentioned that humans have been exploring space for 50 years, Quillex said carefully. What have you been doing during that time? Oh, the usual stuff, Tom said. Mapping solar systems, cataloging planets, establishing colonies. We've got about 40 settled worlds now. 40, Rook's voice cracked. You've established 40 colonies in 50 years. Well, not all of them are fully settled yet, Rosie clarified. Some are still in the terraforming phase. Terraforming. Vexstar's scales were now cycling through colors that didn't exist in any known spectrum. You're modifying entire planets. Sure, it's not that hard once you get the hang of it, Captain Murphy said with a shrug. Most planets just need a few adjustments to make them more habitable. Atmosphere modification, climate control, ecosystem introduction. Standard stuff. You're talking about class of deathworlds, Rook protested. Planets that can kill most species just by existing in their general vicinity. Right, those are the fun ones, Tom said enthusiastically. The challenge is figuring out how to make them comfortable for human habitation without losing all the interesting features that make them dangerous. You want to keep the dangerous features? Quillex asked, weakly. Of course, Rosie said, looking at him like he'd suggested removing all the flavor from food. What's the point of living on a planet if it doesn't keep you on your toes? We've got one colony world with acid rainstorms that happen every few days, makes for spectacular light shows, and it keeps the population alert. Another one has these great ice storms that can freeze you solid in minutes, Captain Murphy added. Really builds character, plus the kids love ice skating on the naturally formed rinks. The kids. Rook's voice had reached a pitch that suggested his vocal cords were filing a formal complaint. Oh yeah, families love the colony worlds, Tom said. Nothing like a little environmental challenge to teach children proper survival skills. My nephew's only 8, and he can already identify 17 different types of poisonous plants and knows how to build emergency shelter from volcanic debris. That's not normal child development, Quillex said, his diplomatic training completely failing to provide appropriate responses for this situation. Sure it is, Rosie said, matter-of-factly. By the time most human children are 10, they know basic first aid, can identify edible plants, understand weather pattern prediction, and can construct basic tools from available materials. Standard childhood education. What we're trying to understand, Vexstar said, his scales now displaying a color that could only be described as existential panic, is whether your species actually needs Deathworld trials, or whether Deathworld trials need protection from your species. The three humans exchanged glances, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something that might have been confusion. Protection, Captain Murphy asked. From us. You've eliminated entire pirate fleets, Rook said, his paranoia reaching levels that required new scientific classification. You've conquered a Class X Deathworld. You've terraformed 40 hostile planets. You consider carnivorous plant systems to be interesting ecosystem features. You're not just apex predators, Quillex said, his diplomatic composure finally cracking. You're apex predators who have turned predation into an art form and environmental hostility into a hobby. And you want to test your survival skills on our most dangerous planet, Vexstar added, his scales now strobing in patterns that suggested he was trying to communicate distress in 17 different languages simultaneously. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that occurs when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, and both sides realize they might have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of physics. Wait, Navigator Walsh said slowly. You guys actually think these places are dangerous? The question hung in the air like the last note of a symphony that nobody knew how to end. Chairman Vexter's scales had given up on coherent color patterns and were now just cycling through what appeared to be a visual representation of a complete mental breakdown. Security Chief Rook's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely, which was somehow more disturbing than when they'd been going off like a broken alarm clock. Ambassador Quillex's diplomatic smile had become a rictus of confusion that suggested his brain had blue-screened and was attempting to restart. Dangerous? Vexter asked, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose entire worldview had just been fed through a wood chipper. These are Class 7 Deathworlds. Planets that exist specifically to eliminate organic life. Right, but like, dangerous how? Captain Murphy asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. I mean, sure, the acid rain sounds like it might be annoying, and the gravity's a bit heavy, but it's not like the planet's actively hunting you. The predators are actively hunting you, Rook protested weakly. Oh, predators, Tom said with the kind of dismissive wave you might give to a mild inconvenience. Yeah, we've got those at home too. Actually, your predators look kind of sluggish. Do they have any interesting behavioral patterns, or do they just kind of run at you and hope for the best? They coordinate complex hunting strategies, Quillex said, his diplomatic training trying desperately to find some way to make this conversation make sense. They use pack tactics, environmental manipulation and psychological warfare. Psychological warfare. Rosie looked up from her notes with interest. Like what? Intimidation displays, territorial marking, or do they actually understand fear responses well enough to exploit them? They roar loudly, Vexter said. And even as he said it, he realized how pathetic that sounded. Our house cats roar louder than that, Captain Murphy said, watching the holographic display of the fearsome Infernus 7 predators. And they're about a tenth the size. Do your predators have any other tricks? The three council members exchanged glances that conveyed entire conversations about professional dignity, career prospects, and the fundamental nature of reality. They had spent centuries building the most comprehensive Deathworld trial system in the galaxy. They had created challenges that eliminated every species that attempted them. They had the most dangerous planets, the most lethal environments, and the most sophisticated testing protocols. And these humans were critiquing their apex predators' roaring technique. Perhaps, Quillix said carefully, we should discuss alternative arrangements. Alternative arrangements? Tom asked brightly. Like what? Well, Vexter said, his scales settling into a color that suggested he was trying very hard to salvage some dignity from this situation. Given your species' unique qualifications, perhaps you could serve as consultants rather than test subjects. Consultants for what? Captain Murphy asked. Deathworld survival training, Rook said, though his voice suggested he was having trouble believing his own words. For other species. The three humans looked at each other and for a moment there was a flicker of something that might have been amusement. You want us to teach other species how to survive on dangerous planets? Rosie asked. The concept has merit, Quillix said, his diplomatic instincts finally finding something to work with. Your species clearly has extensive experience with hostile environment survival. I mean, sure we could do that, Tom said agreeably. Though I'm not sure how much help we'd be. Most of what we do is just common sense. Common sense. Vexter's scales were now displaying a color that suggested he was reconsidering his entire career path. You know, basic stuff, Captain Murphy said. Like checking for predators before you sleep, understanding local weather patterns, knowing which plants are edible and which ones will kill you. Elementary survival skills. Those are advanced survival techniques, Rook protested. Most species require years of training to master environmental awareness. Really? Tom looked genuinely surprised. Human children learn that stuff by the time they're 5, 6 at the latest. What do you teach them first? Quillix asked, his diplomatic curiosity overriding his existential crisis. Well, you start with the basics, Rosie said, adopting the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious. How to identify immediate threats, how to find or create shelter, how to locate water sources, how to signal for help. Then you move on to more advanced stuff like weather prediction, tool creation, and basic medical treatment. That's a complete survival curriculum, Vexter said weakly. That's kindergarten, Captain Murphy corrected. By the time they're 10, they're learning about ecosystem management, predator behavior analysis, and environmental modification techniques. Environmental modification. Rook's voice had reached a pitch that suggested his species' equivalent of a nervous breakdown. Sure, you know, making hostile environments more comfortable, Tom said cheerfully. Like redirecting lava flows, modifying atmospheric composition, or introducing beneficial species to improve ecosystem balance. You teach children to redirect lava flows? Quillix asked, his diplomatic training providing absolutely no framework for this conversation. Well, not the really big ones, Rosie said reasonably. That's more of a high school level skill. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that occurs when the universe decides it's had enough of pretending to make sense and just gives up entirely. So Captain Murphy said eventually, about this consulting thing. What would that involve exactly? 6 months later, the Galactic Deathworld Council had been quietly renamed the Galactic Environmental Challenge Advisory Board. Their primary function had shifted from testing species on lethal planets to providing what they generously called beginner-friendly wilderness experiences under human supervision. The humans had established a modest office in the station's former interrogation wing, which they'd converted into what they called a basic survival training facility. The facility featured such amenities as a controlled acid rain simulator, a gravity adjustment chamber that only went up to twice normal, and a predator training area populated by creatures that the humans had deemed reasonably safe for beginners. Species from across the galaxy now came to the station not for Deathworld trials, but for what the humans called camping trips with professional guides. The survival courses were hugely popular, partly because they were the only Deathworld training programs with a survival rate above 0%, and partly because the humans had a tendency to treat everything as a fun outdoor activity. Remember, Captain Murphy was saying to a group of nervous Siferians during their orientation session, the acid rain on Infernus Thuvan is actually pretty mild. It's only dangerous if you don't wear proper protection, or if you stay out in it for more than a few hours. Think of it like a really aggressive shower. What if we encounter the carnivorous plants? Asked one of the Siferians, whose species had previously considered Venus flytraps to be apex predators. Oh, those are actually pretty cool, Tom said enthusiastically. They're basically just really enthusiastic about meeting new people. You just have to remember to keep moving and don't stand still for more than a few minutes. Kind of like dealing with overly friendly dogs. And the predators? Another Siferian asked weakly. The predators are great, Rosie said, pulling up a holographic display that showed the fearsome beasts of Infernus Thuvan. They're actually quite intelligent, and they follow predictable hunting patterns. Once you understand their behavioral cues, they're pretty easy to avoid. Plus they're really not that fast compared to what we're used to. What should we do if we encounter one? The first Siferian asked. Standard predator protocols. Captain Murphy said, matter-of-factly. Make yourself look bigger, avoid direct eye contact, back away slowly, and if all else fails, make loud noises and throw things. Same as dealing with any large carnivore. That's it? The Siferian asked, sounding disappointed. Well, you could always try befriending them, Tom suggested. Some of the colonists on Dante Fifth have had pretty good luck with that approach, though I should mention that requires a bit more advanced training. In the observation deck overlooking the training facility, the former members of the Deathworld Council watched the humans conduct their basic survival orientation with the kind of fascination usually reserved for natural disasters or tax audits. They're teaching the Siferians to befriend apex predators. Rook observed, his paranoia having evolved into a kind of resigned acceptance of universal chaos. The Siferians are taking notes, Quillix added, his diplomatic training having adapted to include managing species that can terraform planets as a hobby. Our most dangerous Deathworld has become a tourist destination, Vextar said, his scales now permanently set to a color that suggested he'd given up trying to understand how the universe worked. At least our survival rate has improved, Rook pointed out. We're at 97% now. What happened to the other 3%? Quillix asked. They asked for advanced training, Vextar said, wearily. The humans took them to something called Australia Fifis, for what they described as a fun weekend camping trip. They came back asking if there were any planets with more interesting challenges. Down in the training facility, Captain Murphy was wrapping up the orientation session with his standard closing remarks. Remember, the most important thing about surviving on a Deathworld is to stay calm, stay alert, and stay curious. Every hostile environment is just a puzzle waiting to be solved. Every predator is just a neighbor you haven't met yet. Every environmental challenge is just an opportunity to learn something new. And if we get scared, asked one of the Siferians, then you're probably not paying attention, Tom said cheerfully. Fear is just your brain's way of telling you that you need more information. Once you understand what you're dealing with, most scary things become just interesting things. Any final questions? Captain Murphy asked. Yes, said the lead Siferian. Do you have any planets that are actually dangerous? Like dangerous enough to challenge humans? The three humans exchanged glances, and for a moment there was a flicker of something that might have been excitement. Well, Rosie said slowly, there is this one place we've been meaning to explore. It's got some interesting features that might actually require some creative problem solving. What kind of features? The Siferian asked eagerly. Oh, you know, Captain Murphy said with the kind of casual enthusiasm that had become his trademark. Reality-distorting gravitational anomalies, matter-consuming energy fields, and what appears to be a sentient volcanic system that takes personal offense to visitors. It sounds wonderful, the Siferian said, and there was genuine excitement in their voice. Yeah, Tom said grinning. We're thinking of calling it advanced camping. In the observation deck, the former Deathworld Council members watched as an entire species of previously risk-averse aliens began planning their first expedition to what sounded like a physics-defying hellscape, guided by humans who considered it a recreational activity. I think, Quillix said quietly, we may have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of danger. I think, Vextar replied, his scales settling into a color that suggested philosophical acceptance. We may have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of humans. I think, Rook added, his paranoia having evolved into something that might charitably be called wisdom. We may have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of everything. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, on a small blue planet that most of the galaxy had never heard of, children were learning to swim in oceans filled with creatures that could kill them, playing in forests populated by predators that had evolved specifically to hunt them, and considering it all just another day in paradise. Because that's what humans do. They take the impossible and make it look easy. They take the deadly and make it look fun. They take the challenges that would destroy entire civilizations and turn them into weekend hobbies. And they do it all with a smile, a shrug, and the kind of casual confidence that suggests they've never met a problem they couldn't solve with a little creativity and a lot of stubborn determination. The universe, as it turned out, was a much more interesting place than anyone had imagined. It was just that it had taken humanity to show everyone else how to properly appreciate it.